Hi, my name is Maria Elena, and I would like to share a story with you that is 100% paranormal and I believe worth listening to. In the year 2020, when the pandemic situation began, I had to move to a different state because I could no longer afford the rent for my apartment. I lived alone with my mother, so after planning everything and getting ready, we embarked on the long journey to the state of Texas, where we now live. This happened in the United States, as I mentioned. After driving all day and stopping at a few places to eat and rest, night fell, and my mother was already asleep. I had a strong urge to use the bathroom but couldn't find anything nearby, not a single gas station or town in sight. There was nothing until I suddenly saw a sign in English that said, "Rest Area," with an arrow pointing into a small valley. Here, these rest areas are very common, with bathrooms and sometimes even tables where you can eat or simply rest for a while. I turned off the highway and parked in the small area. At the back, I saw two large restrooms, one for women and one for men, but there was no one around. I woke my mother to tell her I was going to the bathroom and asked if she wanted to go too, but she said no and told me she'd wait in the car and watch over me from outside. As I am her only daughter, she has always been very protective of me. The place was empty, and everything around was completely dark except for the lights of the bathrooms and their surroundings. When I entered the bathroom, I saw all the stall doors open. There was no one else there, so I checked them all to see which one was clean and entered one. It didn't take long before I suddenly heard two people come in. I could hear their voices whispering and subtly laughing. I stepped out of the stall and saw two older women standing by the sinks. They didn't enter the stalls. They were just standing there, watching me as I washed my hands in a very strange way. Both of them turned to look at me and smiled with an overwhelming friendliness, something that seemed eerie to me. I felt very uncomfortable but decided to smile back because I didn't want to be rude. But at that moment, one of the women smiled, showing her yellow and rotten teeth. Both told me they liked my coat. I responded with a smile and thanked them. Then one of them asked if I was leaving, which struck me as very odd because why would I stay in that place? I told them yes, that my mother was waiting for me in the car, all this while I was drying my hands. But just as I was about to leave, one of them said, "Stay a little longer and chat," with a very unsettling smile. I told her I couldn't because I was in a hurry, wished them good night and left as quickly as I could. I ran to the car, and my mother asked me what had happened, as she saw my urgency to leave immediately and the frightened look on my face. I got back on the road and told her everything that had happened with those women. I asked if she had seen them enter, and my mother had a look of total astonishment. She told me, "Elena, no one else entered that bathroom but you. I was watching the door the entire time and no one else went in or arrived at the place. We were alone the whole time." I felt chills all over my body, driving and trembling, while my mother tried to comfort me by saying that maybe the women were already in the bathroom when I went in, which was why she never saw them enter. But no, I am 100% sure there was no one there because I checked all 5 stalls with open doors to see which one was clean, and there was no one inside or outside the stalls. The bathroom didn't have large windows either. So, we never knew how those women, with such strange attitudes, had entered. I simply categorized it as something paranormal because I couldn't find any explanation. I don't know who they were, whether they were spirits that inhabited that place or maybe witches. I don't know. I will never know. But this was real, and now that I'm narrating it and reliving the moment, I feel many chills. Thank you for listening to my story. Good night to all. A few years ago, when my son was just 4 years old, something completely paranormal happened. My name is Marta, and I am a single mother. Occasionally, I was sent to small neighboring towns to work in their schools. I had no one to take care of my little boy, so I took him everywhere with me. One time, I remember we were on winter vacation in our city. I was visiting my mother, and we spent the holidays there. But the time came for me to return to work, so I hit the road with my child. The day was freezing and completely cloudy. It was around 7 in the evening when my son asked to go to the bathroom. He had been out of diapers since he was 3 and always let me know when he needed to go. I had to pull over because I didn't know of any nearby gas stations. We were in the middle of nowhere. So, I looked for a place where I could safely pull the car off the road and found a perfect spot. I turned off the car and helped my son out so he could do his business, covering him with a towel I always carried for emergencies. My son always asked me to turn around because he was embarrassed, so to make him comfortable, I always turned my head away while he did his business. And so I did. But suddenly, I heard a small laugh coming from the woods. I knew it wasn't my son, even though it was a child's laugh. I immediately turned to look at my son and saw that he was smiling and waving at someone I couldn't see. My son was very flushed and suddenly said, "Mommy, tell the girl to cover her eyes because she's watching me." I've always been very fearful, and hearing him say that made my whole body shiver. I asked him what girl, that there was no one there, and told him to hurry up and stop playing because it was very cold. But my son kept laughing, blushing, and insisting that I tell the girl among the branches to turn around because he was embarrassed that she was watching him. With his innocent, childlike words, I was crouching down, helping him pull up his pants when I suddenly felt someone or something pull my hair. I clearly felt a tug, even painful. I knew it wasn't my son because I was looking right at him at that moment. My reaction was to look around everywhere to see who or what it was. I was very scared and wanted to get my son out of there immediately. I couldn't see anyone in that place. My son kept insisting that the girl had pulled my hair, that she was mean, and he wouldn't stop repeating it while I was seating him in the car and buckling his seatbelt. I told him to be quiet, that we were leaving, as I was too nervous and didn't want to drive in that state. I started the car and locked the doors. By now it was getting dark, so I turned on the car lights. And then I saw it, something that made me even more nervous than I already was. A few meters ahead, there was a small tombstone and a cross. I drove closer to see it better and read a name and a date. It was for a 5-year-old girl who had apparently died in that place. It dawned on me what my son and I had experienced. We had parked in a spot where the soul of a little girl still played and lingered. I wanted to think of it that way, and not as something more, something evil. When we left that place, my son was saying goodbye to her, as he could see her and watched as she observed us leaving. Years passed, and now when I ask my son, who is a teenager, he says he doesn't remember anything. But this was real. It really happened. And it's something that leaves you thinking about so many things and questions that have no answers other than the paranormal. Hello, my name is Federico, and I'm from Colombia. Today I want to share this story on behalf of my family. We experienced this when we were on vacation. As I mentioned, my parents, my older brother, and I were going on vacation to the beach. This happened a few years ago, but we all remember it as if it were yesterday because of how horrifying it was. We left home around 6 in the evening because my father still had to work and didn't get off until 5. So we had to wait until then. We had never had problems traveling at night before since we had never seen anything out of the ordinary or experienced anything paranormal. Thus, we never thought this would happen to us. We passed through a very small town in the middle of nowhere, looking for a place with a public restroom since my mother and brother needed one. We found a little shop with a bathroom beside it, and there was a sign saying they charged for entry. My father parked and we all got out. While they went to the bathroom, my father and I went into the shop to buy something. It was already 9 at night. We entered the shop and saw an elderly lady tending to it. I found it odd that she was alone in such a desolate place, especially at night, as it seemed quite dangerous. So, just to break the uncomfortable silence, I asked her if she wasn't afraid to be alone in the shop. She looked at me with an unfriendly expression and said, The ones who should be afraid are you. He doesn't like outsiders wandering around here, especially at this hour. You should leave now." My father and I were taken aback and didn't know how to respond. I imagined my father was thinking the same as me, that she was just a poor old lady who was starting to hallucinate. So, I just thanked her for charging us and for the warning, even though we didn't know what or who she was talking about. We were about to leave when suddenly we heard her from afar saying, "Leave quickly and don't stop until you're out of this area." My father just raised his hand to thank her and we left. My brother and mother were already waiting for us in the car. They asked why we took so long if there wasn't anyone else, and we told them what the lady had said. My mother just said, "Poor thing, they shouldn't leave her alone working at that age." After that, we left, and no one mentioned it again. Minutes passed as we were driving through that area. We had already left behind the few houses there, and we were on a stretch of road surrounded by wilderness. It was very dark. Suddenly we noticed someone standing on the side of the road raising their hand asking for a ride. My mother is a very kind-hearted person who always helps others without expecting anything in return. So, of course, she told my father to stop because someone was stranded and asking for a lift. My brother and I immediately told her it wasn't a good idea because it's dangerous everywhere nowadays. But my mother said she would just ask if they needed to call someone to pick them up, not necessarily give them a ride. So, with some hesitation and caution, my father stopped. It was a man dressed in women's clothing with a brown cloak covering his entire body and part of his head. His hands and feet were also completely covered. We couldn't see his face as it was too dark. We lowered the car windows and my mother asked, "Excuse me, do you need help?" But he just nodded without making a sound. That was already quite strange. My brother quietly told my mother to raise the window and leave, but it was as if that man had heard. As soon as my brother said that, the man turned to look directly at him. My mother repeated the question, but the man started approaching the car closer and closer. My father panicked, rolled up the windows and started accelerating. But that thing was almost on top of the car. We saw him uncover his hands, but they weren't human hands. They were claws. He started running at the same speed as our car, scratching the windows completely, trying to get in. But he didn't run like a human. It was more like he was gliding. It was the most terrifying, eerie thing I have ever seen in my life, and I'm sure my family feels the same way. My father did everything he could to shake that thing off. He almost lost control, and we nearly went off the road. But thank God, nothing worse happened. Suddenly, it was gone, disappearing into thin air. My father got us out of there as fast as he could. We were all in shock, and my mother was even more so. I still remember how she cried and trembled. It took her several minutes to be able to speak as she was in total panic. Although we were also scared, we tried to calm and comfort her, telling her it was all over. It ruined our vacation, and on the way back we definitely didn't go through that town again. We never passed by there again. But when discussing it with my family afterward, we realized the old lady wasn't so crazy after all. She knew something that happens in that town that only the locals are aware of. Something very bad and terrifying occurs there. We never investigated further, as my mother said she didn't want to attract anything evil and preferred to leave it as it was and try to overcome that event. But to be honest, I think it's something you can't get over. Only those who experience it can understand the trauma it leaves behind. Although we don't know exactly what that thing was, we are sure it was some kind of demon or evil entity that didn't like us being on its turf, just as the old lady mentioned. The moral of the story is never to stop in the middle of nowhere at night to offer strangers a ride. We don't know what would have happened if we had let that thing into our car. Good evening. My name is Heriberto Peña, and I'm here to tell you about a twisted event that happened to my girlfriend and me on the roads of Veracruz. Here in Veracruz, it's well known that strange things happen on the highways. Many people have seen balls of fire descending from the mountains, Some have even claimed to see witches flying, or women with horrible appearances walking through the woods by the roads in the middle of the night. To be honest, we had never experienced anything like that, nor seen anything paranormal in our lives, so we just dismissed these stories as urban legends and left it at that. But that night we experienced it firsthand, and as is often said, you don't believe it until it happens to you. This experience didn't involve witches or balls of fire, but we did see something extremely terrifying. This is our story. It was past midnight. As I mentioned, we were driving on the highway. In fact, we were listening to paranormal stories because my girlfriend and I are huge fans of such things. Our little dog was asleep, and everything was calm until that moment. Suddenly, my girlfriend lost signal on her phone, so the stories stopped playing since she was the one streaming them. At that exact moment, Molly, our dog, started barking at the window, looking outside. Her barks were very loud and unsettling. She only barks like that when a stranger enters the house or when she senses something bad. My girlfriend looked out the window but couldn't see anything because it was too dark. We tried to calm Molly down because she was uncontrollable. Her barks were so loud they deafened us. No matter how much my girlfriend petted her and tried to soothe her, Molly wouldn't stop looking outside and barking excessively. She was seeing or sensing something we couldn't. My girlfriend started to feel very scared because she knew Molly wasn't barking for no reason. She told me she was afraid, and honestly, I was very scared too, but I didn't want to show it. I kept telling her it was nothing and that pets sometimes behave that way. But deep down, I knew Molly was sensing something bad. Suddenly, Molly not only barked but also started scratching the window glass as if she wanted to get out. That's when we saw that thing. It wasn't human or animal. It was a very tall and thin man, dressed in a suit, with a grin from ear to ear. He was dancing, moving his body in a very grotesque and unnatural way. The worst part was that he was moving at the same speed as our car. I couldn't look at the figure too much because I was driving and had to keep my eyes on the road. My girlfriend, who saw everything, is still traumatized. She said that despite the darkness of the road, she could make out a very tall and thin figure with a mocking and sinister grin, moving in a very creepy and unnatural way as if it had no bones, advancing at the same speed as the car. That thing was watching us, mocking our fear. It was then that Molly stopped barking and just trembled. My girlfriend turned around and started praying, telling me to drive faster and get us out of there quickly. She kept her eyes closed and turned her back on that thing, which was only a few meters away from our truck. I felt a tremendous responsibility to get us out of that terrifying situation without losing control of the wheel, because my nerves were on edge. Suddenly, I couldn't see that man anymore. I don't know when we lost him or if he disappeared. I told my girlfriend that the thing was gone, but she didn't want to open her eyes, let alone look back. Her hands were sweating from fear. She was in shock from what had just happened. Molly jumped into the front seat and climbed onto my girlfriend's lap, as if knowing she needed her. I am still amazed by animals' ability to sense energies, whether good or bad. It was Molly who alerted us that we were about to see something so horrible that it will stay in our memory for the rest of our lives. My girlfriend hugged Molly the whole way and didn't look out the window until we reached our destination. On our return trip, we obviously decided to travel during the day. We have shared our terrifying anecdote with friends and family, but as expected, many find it hard to believe us. This time we wanted to share it here to see if anyone else has seen that dancing man on the roads, and because we know many people have also witnessed strange and unexplained things on highways. My girlfriend wanted to share this to feel less alone because her family labeled her as crazy when she told them about it.